This is Story Recapped. Today I'm going to explain an action horror thriller film called Daybreakers. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. 10 years after a bat causes a global pandemic, the human population has mutated into vampires, and the remaining uninfected humans are hunted down and farmed like cattle. As humans become more scarce, so too does the vampire's primary source of food. Vampires who have been deprived of human blood for too long slowly lose their sanity and turn into bat-like creatures called subsiders. Technology has also advanced as vampires adapt to the sun, UV-blocking car windows, night hours, as well as an underground tunnel network keep the vampires safe from the deadly solar radiation. Ed heads to Bromley Marks, the leading supplier of human blood. As he makes his way to his office, he passes by a chamber with sedated humans kept alive and farmed for blood. Many of the pods are noticeably empty as humans are slowly getting harder to come by. He's the company's head hematologist, working on a viable substitute for human blood. At a meeting, a presentation shows the effects of prolonged blood deprivation on vampires. Their subject exhibits deformities and severe deterioration of the brain before turning into a subsider. With less than 5% of the human population remaining, their blood supply will only last one more month. Ed meets with the company owner, Charles Bromley. Charles discusses how the virus saved him from a disease and gave him immortality. However, his daughter did not share the same sentiment. She refused to be turned into a vampire and said that Charles turning into a vampire is much worse than him having cancer. Charles then notices that Ed doesn't touch his coffee, which has been infused with human blood. Ed says he doesn't drink coffee, but Charles suspects that Ed pities the humans. He then says developing a blood substitute would be the quickest and most effective way to preserve humanity. Ed then meets with his colleague Christopher and informs him that they're being tasked to proceed. Their current substance is holding up and is working on vampire animals, so they decide to move past animal testing. In an operation room, they prepare a test subject to be injected with the blood substitute. The company higher-ups oversee the test, with Charles at the helm, watching anxiously. They inject the subject with the blood substitute, ensuring that his vitals are stable. Ed injects the full dose and the procedure appears to be successful. Suddenly, the subject vomits and begins convulsing. Ed's team rushes to stabilize him. Once they stabilize the subject, he bursts and his entrails cover the entire room. While driving home, Ed notices his ear becoming pointier, an indicator of blood deprivation. He opens the sun visor to get a better look, unknowingly steering into the opposite lane. An oncoming car steers out of his way and crashes. Ed manages to stop safely and runs to the crashed vehicle. A woman with a crossbow, Audrey, emerges from the vehicle and shoots Ed. Audrey threatens to shoot again, and Ed realizes that the vehicle's occupants are humans. With the police approaching, Ed tells them to hide in his car, and while reluctant, the group does what he says. The police arrive, and Ed tells them that the humans went the other way. In the car, Audrey sees Ed's ID. When the cops leave, Audrey thanks Ed and tells him that she'll see him soon. At home, Ed has dinner and tends to his plants. The house alarm system alerts him that the door is open, and his brother, Frankie, appears. Frankie is a soldier and has just returned from hunting humans. He brings Ed a bottle of pure human blood as a gift. Frankie pours them some blood and Ed refuses. Frankie insists, saying that animal blood is disgusting, but Ed insists on not drinking human blood. Frankie calls Ed a hypocrite for refusing to drink human blood while working at a company that farms humans. Ed then counters, saying that he doesn't hunt humans, which is something Frankie does happily. Ed then dumps the blood down the sink. Frankie snatches the bottle away and upon seeing it's almost empty, smashes it against the wall. As he storms out, he comes face to face with a subsider. Ed and Frankie back away slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. The subsider walks in, snarling. It starts licking the blood off the wall. The subsider notices them and spreads its wings in order to appear threatening. The brothers back away while the subsider treats itself to the blood on the counter. Frankie grabs a knife, but the subsider launches him into a wall. Ed tries to keep the subsider at bay while calling Frankie. Frankie gets back up and they attack the subsider, but the subsider jumps up, sticking to the ceiling. Frankie slices the subsider open and its blood spurts all over the walls. He then cuts the subsider's head off. Police soon arrive to take their statements. The detective comments that the subsider's situation is growing worse. They discover that the subsider's name used to be Carl. Ed recognizes him as the local gardener who he'd seen 2 weeks ago. The detective surmises that Carl must have fed on other vampires, which only hastens the process. They find self-inflicted wounds and find out that Carl may have fed on himself, speeding up the mutation further. In the morning, Ed is awakened by the house security system. He checks the alarm and is met by Audrey's crossbow. Audrey reveals that she's there to ask for Ed's help. She mentions the blood substitute but says that it won't be enough. She alludes to the possibility of a cure. She hands Ed a piece of paper and disappears. On the paper is a map to a meetup. Ed heads upstairs and runs into Frankie, who appears to have been listening. The following night, Ed is in Charles's office. Charles asserts that they need to push forward with the experiments. Ed asks if a substitute would remove the need for human consumption, but Charles plans to allow the human population to increase so they can farm them again. A blood substitute would appease most of the population, but there will always be some who will be willing to pay extra for real human blood. Ed then asks if Charles thinks people would pay for Charles's daughter. In the morning, Ed heads to the meeting spot. He arrives at a remote rural area where Audrey awaits him. Ed drives into a tree where he's shaded from the sun and meets a man named Elvis. Elvis claims that he was once a vampire, but he was cured and turned human again. Meanwhile, Audrey gets distracted, and a masked man grabs her. Elvis takes Ed's hand and lets him feel his heartbeat. Before the two can continue, Audrey appears with the masked man, who Ed identifies as Frankie. Elvis and Frankie point guns at each other, and Ed tries to defuse the situation. They see a military convoy approaching, and Audrey pushes Frankie into the sunlight. Elvis then knocks Frankie out. The military starts shooting, and they all run into Ed's car. They drive away, but the convoy catches up to them and starts shooting. Holes riddle Ed's car, and sunlight breaks through. Elvis takes over the wheel as Ed hides from the sunlight. Elvis crosses a broken bridge that collapses when the military trucks pass. They successfully escape as the truck following them explodes. They arrive at a riverbank where Elvis tells Ed how he was cured. Elvis was driving during the daytime when the blood deprivation took its toll and led to him crashing into a barrier. When he got launched out of his car, he was immediately set ablaze for a brief moment before splashing into the water. When he emerged, he was human again. The sun cured him. They drive to the human hideout while Audrey narrates how they go on weekly expeditions to find surviving humans, but humans are turning up less and less. She notices Ed's ear becoming deformed. Afraid Ed might lose himself, Audrey offers him her blood. Ed is reluctant, but he drinks. They soon arrive at the human settlement where Jarvis is preparing to set out and fetch what they believe is the largest number of human refugees. Ed and Jarvis wish each other good luck. Audrey leads Ed in and introduces him to Senator Turner, a politician sympathetic to the human cause. It's revealed that more politicians in office are pro-human and want the cure to be in the right hands. Turner wants humans to repopulate for the right reasons and hopes Ed would be the key. At Bromley Marks, Charles stares at the human farming pods, which are becoming increasingly more sparse. At a Subway, a news report shows blood prices skyrocket as fewer humans are being found. A man asks for more blood in his coffee, but the barista is only allowed to serve 5% blood with each cup. He demands more and ends up grabbing the bag of blood and spilling it all over himself. The crowd then storms the store, grabbing as much blood as they can. Police arrive to neutralize the situation, but the vampires pay them no attention as they are busy feeding on the spilled blood. Back at the settlement, Ed tests Elvis's blood and asks specifics about the accident that cured him. Elvis says that was the most painful thing he had ever experienced, and likens it to being struck by lightning and suddenly feeling his heart start beating again. Ed surmises that the only way to treat infected vampire blood could be within the body. Later, Audrey assures Ed that humans believe that he can help despite the humans being a little hostile. Ed can't remember what it was like to be human and asks Audrey if she is afraid to die. Audrey answers yes and says this fear is probably the reason why so many people agreed to be turned into vampires during the height of the pandemic. Audrey then asks Ed how he became a vampire, and Ed reveals that Frankie turned him. To divert the topic, Ed notices a metal tank which Audrey identifies as an old fermentation tank. Ed then gets the idea to use it for an experiment. They inspect the tank and work to transform the interior. Ed intends to use the tank as a container for controlled sunlight exposure. Meanwhile, Jarvis leads a convoy of humans back to the settlement. With him is a young woman who talks about being on the run most of her life. They get a flat tire and Jarvis realizes it's an ambush. They are soon riddled with tranquilizer darts and arrows. The humans try fighting back with crossbows and bows. Vampires hit in the heart explode instantly. The humans are quickly overrun and the girl radios the settlement warning them. Elvis answers, but the girl gets hit with a tranquilizer. The humans then scramble to leave. Turner tells them that they'd regroup at a secluded cabin, and Audrey, Elvis, and Ed stay to perform the experiment. At Bromley Marks, the girl awakens to see Charles. She's revealed to be Charles's daughter, Allison. Charles hugs her, telling her that he's happy to see her and that the other survivors will soon be farmed. Allison stabs Charles and runs, but a bodyguard knocks her out. Back at the human settlement, the trio prepares the experiment to turn Ed back into a human. With Ed inside the tank, they place a hole to let sunlight in and a switch that would suck all the air out, acting as an extinguisher. They then rig a mirror to direct sunlight into the tank's hole. The experiment begins, and Elvis lets in the sunlight to hit Ed. Ed burns for a few seconds before they shut it off. Ed recovers and tells them to do it again. They repeat the procedure several times until Ed's heart starts beating. Elvis and Audrey see that the experiment has succeeded. At the same time, the military bursts in, so the trio hide under the water tank. Back at Bromley Marks, Charles tasks Frankie with a special assignment. Frankie then heads to Allison's chamber and tries to turn her by force. After a struggle, Frankie bites into Allison's neck, turning her into a vampire. Back at the settlement, Ed steps into the sunlight for the first time. Audrey holds his hand, welcoming him back to humanity. Meanwhile, Charles looks at the human pods with concern. He later visits Allison and finds out that she's not consuming any blood. Instead, she's been feeding on herself. Allison then attacks Charles, forcing her bloody arm into his mouth. A soldier then takes Allison away. News footage shows that subsiders are rapidly increasing in numbers and is now being dubbed an epidemic. Military all over the globe are deployed in major cities to combat the threat. Later, Elvis drives the trio to Senator Turner's cabin. They find the place strangely quiet, and when they enter, they are terrified to see that all the survivors have either fled or been killed, along with Turner. With nowhere else to go, Ed could only think of one person that could help: Christopher. In his lab, Christopher looks at vampire blood under a microscope and seems he has made a discovery. Unable to sustain the captured subsiders, the government decides to execute them via sunlight exposure. The surviving vampires have no choice but to agree. Frankie watches as subsiders are dragged into the sunlight. One woman grabs onto Frankie, and he realizes it was Allison. The people watch in horror as the vampires burn to death. That night, Christopher comes home to see Ed, Audrey, and Elvis in his house. Ed reveals that they now have a cure. Before they can talk further, Christopher gets a call and says that it's his ex-wife, excusing himself. Audrey looks around the house but gets shot with a tranquilizer. Ed then realizes that Christopher has been calling the office this whole time. Elvis and Ed try to fight their way out, and Elvis hits several vampires in the heart. They then escape to an underground tunnel. They find an old gas station, but a subsider emerges. It attacks, but Frankie appears and shoots the creature. Frankie sees that Ed once again has turned human, but keeps his guard up. Ed tries to talk Frankie down, but Frankie confesses that he turned Ed into a vampire, fearing that Ed might die if he remained human. Ed then asks if Frankie wants to help, and he agrees. Elvis then approaches him, and Frankie bites him. Ed pulls Frankie off, pointing the crossbow at him, but Ed notices something happening to Frankie. Later, Ed heads to Bromley Marks and meets with Charles. In Charles's office, Audrey is bleeding, and Charles tells Ed that there's no substitute that would ever taste as good as human blood. Ed then confesses that he can't handle being human and is afraid of dying. He then offers to give Charles the cure in exchange for turning him and Audrey into vampires. Charles declines, telling him that Christopher had already created a blood substitute. Finding a cure was never the goal, and that it was all about business. With the blood substitute set for mass production in a few days, a cure wouldn't be needed. Charles is not surprised Ed couldn't handle becoming human, calling him weak and a coward. Ed counters, asking Charles how he felt turning his daughter into a vampire. Knowing that Frankie turned Allison, Ed calls Charles a bigger coward for not having the guts to do it himself. This angers Charles, and he bites Ed. After biting Ed, Charles falls to the floor, choking and coughing. Ed reveals that treated vampire blood is the cure. Frankie had also been cured when he bit Elvis, and now that Charles had fed on Ed, he has turned human. The military arrives and sets up outside an elevator. When the elevator door opens, Charles appears, tied to a chair. The soldiers then all rush and start feeding on him. They tear Charles apart and rip off his head. Audrey and Ed head downstairs but are met with soldiers. A car then crashes in, and Frankie appears, shooting the soldiers. Frankie quickly defeats all of them, but an even bigger group of soldiers arrive. Frankie tries to talk his fellow soldiers into submitting, telling them about the cure, but they don't listen. All they could focus on is the smell of Frankie's human blood. Frankie then tells Ed to run before the soldiers all crowd Frankie and start biting him. The soldiers all feast on Frankie, drinking his treated vampire blood. Ed and Audrey find their way into a security room, and Ed watches as the vampires finish off Frankie. The soldiers who fed on Frankie are now human. The rest of the soldiers see this, and their hunger gets the best of them. They start cannibalizing one another, appearing to have lost all sense. After a while, Audrey and Ed step out, finding several human soldiers left standing. Christopher then appears and starts shooting the soldiers. He tells Ed that he won't allow a cure to exist. As he prepares to shoot Ed, an arrow pierces his heart and he explodes. They turn to see their savior, Elvis. The trio stands over the corpses and watch as the sun rise. The three then set out to cure the world.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.